There are plenty of great games out there, and sometimes the best way to play them is in co-op with friends, whether that's through online connection or sharing a couch and screen. So with that in mind, I'm Hello Craigo of Pure Xbox, and here are some of the best co-op Xbox games for you to play right now. First up is Baldur's Gate 3. Now, this is the ultimate party game for role-playing enthusiasts. It's an endless fantasy story brimming with narrative strands and possibilities that is basically a D&D dream. Larian Studios have been hard at work cooking up Baldur's Gate 3 for a very long time, so it's no surprise by how massive the game is. I remember playing an early access build back in 2020, and it's crazy to see how far it's come since then. For decades now, the role-playing tabletop adventures of Dungeons & Dragons has been king when it comes to bringing people together. Something that video game developers have been trying to bring to the industry for quite a while now with relatively good success, but they are nowhere near as good as this masterpiece. You and your friends can traverse the story on offer in Baldur's Gate 3 however you please, whether you choose to kill everyone in sight or talk your way out of a fight, even befriend your enemies and go down a darker path. You can even heck seduce them if you fancy it. But what's great is you don't actually have to work together. This is D&D after all. You can go on your own separate adventures from one another, or even just betray your own party members. Now, it must be said that the Xbox Series X is capable of split-screen co-op, whereas the Series S can't do that, but you can always get around this by connecting two controllers at the same time and just taking turns controlling characters. Either way, it's fantastic and you should play it. Next up is Power Wash Simulator. Now, I typically find myself on sensory TikTok a lot of the time, and this is usually the ball smashing videos, wood carving, cracking ice off frozen cars, all of that sensory goodness. But to the point, the main one is power washing videos, like cleaning dirty rugs and cars. Power Wash Simulator is just a pleasant time sink. It's zero stress, just cleaning dirty objects with a power hose. What can be better? Well, playing with your friends, obviously. You can tackle the wonderful career mode in 2-player co-op, and once you've completed any of these missions, then you can go free play with up to 6 players. Whilst this is a carefree and satisfying cleaning game, it's also a bit of fun. You can scratch in, I wish my bleh was as dirty as my van, and just see what your friends say. You know, the classic tropes. There are levels like a helter-skelter slide, a kid's playground, subway stations, and even the Mars rover. But on top of that, the DLC is pretty awesome too. There's Tomb Raider's Croft Mansion, Final Fantasy's Hardy Daytona, and even the Krusty Krab. Plenty for you and your best hose to get stuck into, and by hose I mean power hose. If you thought I meant something else, then maybe your head needs a bit of a clean as well. Next up is Cuphead. Now, this game was originally released in 2017 by Studio MDHR. It's a side-scrolling run-and-gun game, but at first glance, you probably wouldn't guess that it's almost 7 years old. In fact, you'd probably think it was older, mainly down to its timeless rubber hose artwork from the golden age of American animation in the 1930s. But what makes this a perfect 2024 co-op adventure is basically down to how difficult it is. It's one of those couch co-op games that cater to the hardcore couples and friendship groups that just love to defy the odds and feel the ecstasy of victory. While this did come out in 2017, a delicious Last Course DLC did drop in 2022, so there's plenty of content to get stuck into. Next up is Diablo 4. Now let me blow your mind for a second, because this is the 4th main installment in the Diablo series. I know. What makes Diablo 4 a great co-op game, at least in my experience, is that you can play it however you want. If you really want to get stuck into the hardcore cooperative and strategic elements that being in a party can bring, you can. But you can also approach this as a hangout sesh, like playing a single player game with friends. And honestly, you'd be surprised by how quickly an hour can pass when you're just hanging out with friends, killing monsters on Diablo 4. There are 5 different classes to choose from. You and your friends can choose whether or not you want to pepper enemies from far away as a rogue or sorceress class, whilst the rest of you could get stuck in as a druid werebear, tanky barbarian, or a blood bomb necromancer. There's plenty of character builds and character classes and combinations that you and your friends can dive into. Next up is Vampire Survivors. Now, if this is the first time you're catching a glimpse of the game and your immediate thought is, it doesn't really look like much, I'll probably give this one a pass, then I promise you that if you invest some time into the game and experience the joy of what overwhelming numbers of enemies just crowding around you trying to bite your butt feels like, then you'll start to get why this game is so loved. And in my opinion, the best thing to do with things that you love is to share them with friends. With as many as 70 playable characters to choose from, you and 3 of your friends can sit down on a couch and get stuck into the absolute chaos of Vampire Survivors, made even more chaotic with the fact that you now have to keep track of everybody and work together as a team to not die. I mean, that is the premise of the game after all. Multiplayer does change the Vampire Survivors experience because the more of you that join, the less weapons and skills you have, really pushing the fact that you need to work together as a team if you hope to survive. Next up, and a personal favorite of mine, is Party Animals. This is my favorite for many reasons, but mainly the ridiculous ragdoll physics, the adorably fluffy animals to choose from, and the complete anarchy that comes with its game types. Party Animals is chaos personified, whether that's screaming at your friends, betraying them, fumbling around in the background, or being victim to a hilarious accident. It's got it all, and it's good fun. You can team up with your friends online, or instead sit down on a couch with up to 4-player split-screen co-op. There's plenty of game modes to get stuck into, with your straightforward last one standing wins, to team games like adding coal to a moving train to make it move faster than the opposition's, firing bombs at enemies across a river, and collecting as many wobbly gummy treats as you can. Of course, the belly-roaring laughter with your friends is the main pull here, but what's great about Party Animals is the character design. There's adorable cats and dogs to choose from, as well as gorillas and bears, and even sharks, all of which come with tons of customization options as well. Party Animals makes for one of those perfect games to crack out when you've got company around, and it's just generally a really good game to have fun with friends. Next up is Remnant 2. Now, this is a third-person shooter with up to 3-player co-op, and what's always stuck out for me with Remnant 1 and 2 is that they provide a dungeon-crawling challenge similar to the tight gameplay seen in Dark Souls games. And yes, I know that's not an original thought, but it certainly feels that way, and it's worth mentioning. You and your friends can pick from 12 different classes, or archetypes as they're called in the game, with your traditional medic and gunslinger builds, as well as one like the Handler, where you get an adorable puppy to come and murder things with you. The challenge presented in Remnant 2 is quite tough at times, so working together is definitely going to work in your favor, but it's just one of those great games for you and your friends to scratch that soul's itch, you know, dungeons and big bosses, as well as the trademark punishing combat. I'd also say, personally, it's a much more accessible and easy game to party up with friends than traditional Souls games, so if you do want to play a Souls game and you can't be bothered with the summoning faff, then Remnant 2 is for you. Next up is Warhammer 40k Darktide. Now, this will definitely scratch the Left 4 Dead itch in a modern and quite frankly stunning way. Could have easily have recommended Left 4 Dead on its own, and maybe even Back 4 Blood in some cases, but there's something about Darktide that just hits, and I fancied highlighting it. Of course, with every Warhammer game, there's always a dark and action-packed story, but the main pull here is you. It's you and your friends working together to slay hordes of enemies in visceral and satisfying combat. Like, the guns, melee weapons, and abilities just feel great in Darktide. You and your friends can choose between 4 classes, a balanced shooter, the support, a tank, and even a high damage roll. If you were to look up the score for Darktide, you'd see it sat around 70 to 80 out of 100 score-wise, but honestly, just give it a go. You'd be pleasantly surprised, and it's one of those games that caters to a specific gamer and maybe player type, but all the puzzle pieces are there, and it works great. Next up is Dead by Daylight, which quite frankly has one of the best ongoing cult communities in the industry right now, and although it is technically an asymmetric horror game, it's actually quite hilarious to play. You can either solo queue as the killer if you want and come up with hilarious ways to play with your prey, but where the fun lies, for multiplayer at least, is with the survivors. The core gameplay loop is to work on generators to open a door and escape without being brutally murdered. Obviously, the killer makes things way more interesting and unique every single round. You can either toy with your prey, murder them, or join them for some strange and wonderful community fun times. The live service and longevity that the devs have committed to Dead by Daylight is insane. You can now play as Nick Cage and Alan Wake, even Nancy Wheeler and Leon S. Kennedy. They're all playable and wonderful. If you and your friends can break into the community that lives for Dead by Daylight, then I think you'll mostly won't regret it. Next up is Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge. What we have here caters to the Double Dragon, Streets of Rage, and Castle Crasher fans, and it's a best-in-practice example of what it looks like to modernize a classic beat-em-up SNES game. Join up with your friends as the iconic Turtle Boys, as well as other characters from the franchise, and I will say now that I'm always Mikey because he's clearly the best turtle, but the story mode on offer is wonderful. The art style is gorgeous, the combat is slick, and it's quite funny at times. Each character comes with their own stats and moves, and if your friend goes down, you can even feed him pizza to bring him back. It's a great drop in and out game too, so if your friends are busy and you fancy playing with others, just join an online game and get stuck in. Next up is LEGO Fortnite, because, well, Fortnite just literally does everything at this point, and whether you like the game or not, it usually does it well. Recently, a LEGO spin on the survival formula dropped in the form of LEGO Fortnite, and it's quite frankly pretty good. It's one of those games where you can just play with your friends and build a LEGO life together on a joint server. It's got all the bells and whistles of your traditional open world survival craft experience like Valheim and Ark. You can craft tools and weapons to scavenge resources and build your base. What's more is if you and your party just get bored of the whole survival game thing, then Fortnite being Fortnite, you can just dip into a whole host of other custom game modes too, like Rocket Racing and Guitar Hero. They do Guitar Hero now. Keeping them coming is Halo Infinite. Now, in my opinion, Halo is always one of those games that is best played with friends. I was going to feature the Master Chief Collection instead of Halo Infinite, but I chose Infinite and that's just the way it went today. Honestly, and I will defend this, Halo Infinite's campaign is one of the best. It's made even better now that there is co-op. So when you're not getting stuck into some of the epic set-piece campaign missions, you can actually just piss about. You've also got the ever-expanding Forge mode with hundreds of custom games to play like Frogger and Duck Hunt. But Halo Infinite has finally added Firefight, which provides a wonderful PvE experience when you don't feel like sweating it out in matchmaking. When someone isn't telling you Halo Infinite is a bad game, it's actually a really good game, and it's the best it's ever been right now. Next up is a game that probably needs no introduction right now as it's blowing up across the globe, is Palworld. Now obviously this is a game that's straight up drawn comparisons to the likes of Pokemon, but it is so much more than that. It's an open world survival craft game, where yes, you can catch Pokemon with your friends, but also you can build bases, you can enslave a PAL workforce and craft weapons, specifically guns, to go on a murderous rampage, culling all of the local wildlife that you don't enslave into your workforce. Palworld is obviously a great time by yourself, but the survival open world of it all makes for a really good multiplayer experience. And having friends alongside you definitely comes in handy when taking on difficult world and tower bosses. Next up is no stranger to a co-op list, it's It Takes Two. This is a cooperative experience at its finest. It's a story about rekindling love and working together as a team. The core gameplay on offer is split-screen, platforming, and a mix of puzzles, all of which have been masterminded by a sentient buck who wants the protagonist to work on their relationship. Working together is the only way to get through this game. I definitely consider picking your partner well for this one because no doubt some of these challenges may test your patience, but with a lot of kindness, fun, and joy, you'll have a wonderful time getting through It Takes Two. Additionally, you could try A Way Out. It's quite similar to this, only you're not a troubled couple. Instead, you're a troubled couple breaking out of prison. And finally, we have Portal 2. I mean, if It Takes Two doesn't take the co-op crown, then it had to be the mind-bending puzzles of Portal 2. Let's be honest. The multiplayer story of this game lets you play as Long Boy and Dump Truck, who are both robots, each with their own version of the portal gun in hand. The puzzles in both Portal games, for me, just go unmatched. Sure, we might know them all by now, but at the time, you felt like your head was swelling with infinite wisdom if you managed to suss out the challenges. It may be 13 years old now, but the teamwork required, the planning and execution when it comes to cooperatively playing through Portal 2 is still one of the best out there. Portal 2's multiplayer experience is all about using portal guns to navigate through levels. Whether you choose to reposition yourself or your partner to out-of-reach platforms, transport companion cubes onto pressure plates to open doors, or use the infinite portal loop to gain enough momentum to launch yourself across the map, the puzzles are challenging enough, and adding a second brain into the mix can be quite the experience. Just when you thought the list was over, here's a bonus game as well. From my understanding, Monster Hunter Rise is genuinely a really fun time for you and your friends to hang out and grind tanky monsters on. It's a bonus game mainly because I just haven't played that much of it myself. I can recognize that from the outside looking in, Monster Hunter games in general are just really fun to have with friends, so maybe consider checking out Rise. Now, obviously, there are still plenty more brilliant co-op games out there on Xbox, so be sure to comment with your favorite ones, because these are just a batch of our own favorites. Of course, thanks for watching, and all that's left to say is bye-bye for now. Cheerio!